Okay, so hello everyone. This is a discussion about grammar. So the question is grammar evil? Let's start by introducing ourselves. Would you like to go first?
Yeah, sure. This is exciting stuff already. My name is Ruben. I'm the founder of Linguistics Pronunciation, where I help language learners master their pronunciation in a few different languages. I meet people online and in person, and I help individuals and businessmen and women that really just want to build confidence and sound more natural in their target language, and and avoid frustration that comes along with just speaking with somebody new. And so I'm here today also to talk about grammar because I'm in the language sphere along with Sam, and just really want to kind of put in my 2 cents and get a sense of what Sam has to say about it. Sam, who are you?
Who am I?
Who are you?
Yeah. Question. I'm Sam, as Ruben said, one of the founders of Linguas Francas, the online language school. I have taught English in a few different countries, and I also teach Spanish and Portuguese to professionals and entrepreneurs around the world, to help them expand their business potential by engaging in the international market and by learning how to communicate with even more people. So today we're here to discuss grammar, which, a lot of people hate grammar. They hate it with a fiery passion. And then some people defend it just as fervently, just as nearly violently. So why do you think that is? Why do you think there are so many strong emotions one way or the other regarding grammar? What do you think, Ruben?
Well, I think people have an aversion to grammar. They feel like there's so many rules, and that it's kind of maybe the limiting factor to get to know a language. It seems very daunting. It seems very scary to lots of people because in most cases it's quite different from their language, and they don't even know their own language's grammar to begin with. So because they've avoided the word even in their own native language. I don't know. It's also kind of just a boring topic. Maybe people associate it with school and the class that they were forced to take in English or Spanish or whatever language, and a lot of it's based around grammar. So it's not as much practical speaking or real life situations. It's just kind of a mathematical skeleton behind how we speak.
Absolutely. And yeah, so it's interesting that you said that. So a lot of people do see grammar as something boring. For some people, it is boring. For some people, it's exciting. But I think a lot of that has to do with the way grammar is approached, rather than grammar itself inherently being boring or exciting. Some of that is, a personality thing. Some people like it, some people don't. Everyone has their own interests, and everyone likes different things. But some of it is also just the way it's been taught in schools. I mean, how many people here have had a class in school at some point in their life in which they felt like they were writing down useless pieces of information from the board, and it was about grammar? Have you had that experience, Ruben? Yeah. Thank you. Props. And I imagine plenty of you who are watching the replay or who are still coming in have had this kind of experience where you feel like, all right, I'm just copying something down and I'm not really learning this. I'm not enjoying this. It doesn't really make sense to me. And I think that's part of the problem. Now, we can talk about this a little more later down the road during this discussion, but personally, I believe grammar does not have to be approached in that way. And when it isn't approached in that way, it's not evil, as as some people tend to think. But again, we'll talk about these things. So let's sidetrack. Before I forget, I think I should say a random fact about Guarani, because last time.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
So since Ruben, you're the pronunciation master, how about, would you like to hear a tongue twister?
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay, so now that sound that I made a couple of weeks ago that freaked you out, that letter Y in Guarani. So this tongue twister involves that sound. It's
fantastic.
I'll say it one more time.
Oh my gosh.
That means I'm going to go sit on the bench over there and laugh my head off.
And laugh my head off. Wow.
Mm-hmm. And
do it one more time, just for for everybody else.
And
wow.
if I had been practicing a lot recently, I'm sure I could say it about 1.5 times as fast. But it's been a while since I spoke Guarani. So
sounds like it's well rehearsed, my friend.
Thank you. So interesting thing, even though this doesn't seem like it's about grammar at all, that phrase has perfect grammar. It's grammatically correct.
Okay.
So what's the point of speaking in a grammatically correct way? What do you think, Ruben?
Well, I think it just gives us structure for communal understanding. Everybody understands within a larger region, and from maybe even from generations to generations, because while words change often, sometimes pronunciations changes, grammar rarely sees the big changes that span generations of time. So maybe it's a more simplistic code to follow.
Interesting. Well, I think grammar changes a little bit more slowly, but I do think grammar still continues to change. Like if you read old grammar books from 100 years ago, they're going to say all kinds of things about English that are not true anymore.
That's true. But just talking about during your lifetime,
yeah,
during one's lifetime, when it comes to like you communicating with your kids and even not going that far back, thinking about when the last grammar change was in English, I have to think of like people speaking differently, pronouncing things differently, using different words, but the grammar doesn't seem like it's changed too much, whether you're observing the rules of the grammar or not. But the way that things are taught go back at least 100, 200 years.
Well, I think for the most part, but there are fine-tuning changes that are made on in a much faster time span over the course of a matter of years, not decades or centuries, but actually just years. But It's true that it's nowhere near as fast of a change as pronunciation or vocabulary, like you're saying. I think vocabulary is probably the fastest changing of them all, right? We create new words constantly.
Yeah.
So with grammar, you don't notice it as much because it's really, really precise things that a lot of people don't even realize are rules that change frequently or more frequently.
Can you think of something in any language where it's like that, where it's changing super fast or like more noticeably, so we can give people examples too?
In terms of grammar, well, sometimes there are situations in which there's still not a consensus. Like, for example, the concept of if you can end a sentence with a preposition in English. Okay. There are some people who say that it's grammatically incorrect to do this, but from what I've read recently, it's sounding more and more like people are accepting this as a perfectly legitimate way to end a sentence in English.
Oh yeah.
People did it enough over the last 100 years that everyone has stopped, or most people have stopped enforcing that rule, and it now is correct to end a sentence with a preposition.
But so how long, if we can get into those specific examples, how long do you think it takes for, I mean, we know as native English speakers and in the United States that ending with prepositions as we teach a language is something that you're not supposed to do, right? Quote. But it also seems really, really, really formal if you start using whom and in prepositions with those relative clauses with prepositions. So you say like to whom or in whom, for whom. How long do you think that takes for us to realize that no one's really using whom properly? It starts to be less used and it just kind of goes away. Do you think whom will ever disappear from English?
No, I don't think so
at all. I mean, nobody uses.
Well, okay, maybe I can't see 100 years into the future. It's things are changing so fast now that it's there's too much potential for change in so many different directions. But I would say not within our lifetimes. And the reason is because personally believe that there will always be certain spheres in which that particular construction is used because it's preferred, because sophistication is preferred. Not necessarily because it's better, but because some people like to sound sophisticated when they say certain things, you know?
Or they're just kind of like, they want to know where a language comes from. It's almost like, since language is bigger than us, it's happened before our time, it'll continue after we're gone, that, you want to connect with what is supposed to be the correct way, right?
Of course, absolutely. There are a lot of people who have that kind of perception of these things. Personally, I have a lot of respect for example, etymologies of words. When I know where a word came from, how it arrived at its current meaning from its original pieces or original meanings, I start to use the word in a different way. Like, for example, do you know what the word complexity comes from originally in Greek?
No.
So a complexity is a knot.
A knot?
Yes. So rather than, solving a complexity, if you say like untying a complexity or something, if you're using imagery and you say untying, it very subtly, ties in with the whole imagery. You would untie a knot,
Okay.
So those kinds of things for language nerds like us, sometimes it can be fun. On an everyday basis, you don't need to know the origin of the word complexity to appreciate it. But I think we're getting a little bit off topic here. In terms of grammar and understanding these rules, there are ways in which understanding grammar can help you understand different meaning from a particular sentence. So can you think of any examples of a situation which a sentence could mean something one way or a different way depending on a very slight grammatical change?
You mean like an ambiguous sentence, or like,
for example, an ambiguous sentence?
Yeah, like I can think of one off the top of my head. Like he shot the elephant with a gun, or like he might have shot with a gun, or the elephant might have been holding a gun. Is that what you mean?
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
Like structurally ambiguous. Okay.
Mm-hmm. Or those kinds of sentences. That's a situation in which it's a lot more clear. Or anyway, the point of correct grammar, I would argue, is precision. Making yourself more clear.
Mm-hmm.
Now, in terms of learning a language, Yusuf asked a great question. So, like, do we need to study grammar? So we've established grammar has its uses. Is it worth our time? Should we bother learning the rules, doing all of this? What do you think, Ruben?
I mean, I think that the rules are important, especially at the beginning. It teaches you a little bit of discipline if you never learned a second language before. And, it kind of weeds out a lot of people from continuing because there are rules, and you kind of feel like, well, it's just going to be how many people are introduced to a language is with like, simple games or songs or fun colors, or you learn like really exciting things at the beginning, and it gets really exciting until they're like, okay, now we got some rules you got to learn, you got to follow. So here's the grammar of the language, and But I think it's really necessary in a lot of cases. You can't avoid it. But like you're saying, there's different ways to approach it. There's different ways to practice it. It doesn't have to be so, awfully boring and repetitive, but it really does have to be learned somehow,
Yeah, I think so. So now how, in terms of Yusuf's question, another thing I'd like to add to what you said. Mm-hmm. So it's true, there are many different ways of approaching it that can make it more fun. But in terms of how much time and energy you should spend on it, it really depends on your goals and your particular level. I would say when you're first starting with a language, despite the fact that the vast majority of language schools will tell you, oh, you should start with the grammar so you understand the building blocks of a sentence. Right. I understand that mentality. I have respect for it. It works for a lot of people, but it absolutely does not work for a lot of people as well. Yeah. So personally, I prefer to not learn that way. I prefer to learn particular phrases that you can use, expressions, vocabulary that's useful, and a little bit of basic grammar so that you can string these things together in order to make yourself understood in a basic framework. But that doesn't necessarily mean you should go ahead and learn all of the verb tenses and all of the conjugations and all of the, conjunctions and how each one functions in a sentence. Eventually it just gets to the point where you feel like you're just learning mathematical equations. And if that's how your mind works, perfect. I find the engineers I teach tend to like grammar more than anyone else.
Right.
Because it makes sense. It's logical. It's all about you learn a rule, then you follow the rule, and you apply the rule to the situation, and then everything adds up. So it's how their problem-solving minds work. But most of us tend not to think in that kind of way. So I find it's more effective to try other things first. Then once you arrive at more of an intermediate or advanced level, it starts to become increasingly important if you want to reach a high level of proficiency or fluency. And especially if you're studying for an exam in which there's a grammar section, then it's extremely important. But even if your goals are just to become fluent in a language, grammar isn't that important and shouldn't be a major focus until you're in an upper intermediate level, I believe.
Okay.
At least my way of learning is I prefer to learn the parts of a language and then look back and learn the rules, look back and apply them to what I've learned so I can say, oh, that's why they say that.
Yeah, it's kind of cool, the mystery afterwards. But then you have that moment where you're kind of like in doubt. You're kind of like, I don't know, there's definitely two sides of the coin here, and making sure that you're covering all the bases, that not only the rules but the exceptions to the rules. And I would support your last comments about continuing and learning the grammar in kind of a natural way, because it's possible that colloquially, like people in a day-to-day use of the language, maybe they don't speak perfectly grammatically, and so understanding those things to make you sound more natural, because of course for me it's always sounding native-like if I can, and understanding the grammar is one thing, and for me it gives you awareness to know that one thing is correct, and even though it's colloquial, it's something that's common, it's not grammatically correct, and you can just be on the apathetic. It doesn't really matter which one I'm using. I just know the difference, Mm-hmm. And I always see that, transitioning to pronunciation for a second, I always see that same thing with pronunciation, where if you learn an accent to sound like a native speaker or close to it, and you also remember how, let's say, your people speak that language, so how the American accent is, you can rest assured, you can have confidence knowing how to do both of them. You can always change that. You can always go back and forth. So you can use perfect grammar, and you can go with the masses and use their ungrammatical, phrases, but just know the difference.
Absolutely, that's a great point. I think learning both, it's more work, but ultimately it proves a higher level of mastery of the language. If you can code switch between the two because it depends on the situation. You know, if you're in a very formal professional setting, it probably makes more sense to use perfect or more correct, anyway, grammar than in colloquial settings. Like if you're buying a hot dog, for example, you don't need to string together all of these complex sentences. Well, that's another thing.
Right.
Perfect grammar does not necessarily mean complex, arrogant sounding sentences.
Right.
The shortest, complete, grammatically perfect sentence in the English language is, actually, let's see. Does anyone know? What is
the shortest sentence?
The shortest, grammatically correct sentence in the English language.
I am.
I am. There's something even shorter.
Can't think of it. What is it?
So, go.
Go. Oh, yeah.
It's a command, 2 letters, and either a period or an exclamation point. That's it. It's grammatically correct.
Go.
And I don't think, correct me if I'm wrong, Ruben, but in English, I don't believe there are any dialects that make the word go incorrect in some way or another. Are there some dialect of English that I'm not thinking of?
A dialect of English that makes go ungrammatical?
Yes.
No, to my knowledge, that's perfectly grammatical all across the board.
I think so too. So my point is, you don't need complexity to have perfect grammar. You can say the simplest of sentences with perfect grammar. The point is just that it's worth learning it so you understand it. And like Ruben said, learning the way people speak so that you know both and you can switch back and forth between both and truly understand the way language is used.
No question.
So, sorry, go ahead.
I just said no question. I
thought you said I have a question. I'm sorry. I misheard you. No. So when a student asks you to explain some complicated grammar rule or asks you a question and you instantly think of a complicated grammatical explanation, what do? How do you handle that situation, Ruben?
Stop, drop, and roll away. I roll out of the classroom or like out of my computer's monitor. Any grammar questions I start to, I really like teaching grammar. I've tried to move away from it recently just because it is it's generic. You can find it anywhere. A lot of times answers to places, there's lots of people who talk about grammar differences and stuff. Mm-hmm. But I think there's usually a way to explain it in a simple way. I like to use examples a lot. I like to, in fact, start with examples and kind of have them figure it out from there, because the usage is just important as like the theoretical explanation I might have for them. Mm-hmm. Do you find you do something different?
No, I do a lot of the same thing. Well, it depends on the student as well. Like we were talking about with engineers, or it's not just engineers, but certain people prefer to know the building blocks and how things work in a very analytical way. So, for example, a student asked about the difference between onto as one word and on to as 2 words.
Yeah.
Which is the kind of thing that you do not need to know this. Native speakers get it wrong all the time, and no one will think twice about it if you get it wrong in usage. And it really only matters in writing. You don't hear a difference in speaking. But again, I did some similar things to what you just said with use examples, explain it in the simplest of terms possible, rather than talking about all the rules and all the exceptions and how they fit. Kind of approaching it in the kind of way that's like, this is what we do. Very simply, this is why we do it. And don't worry about this. Try to forget it because it's not important.
Yeah.
In fact, sometimes I preface it with that. And I say, I will only talk about this if you insist, because I don't think it's a good use of your time and you pay by the hour.
Right. Yeah, that's tricky too. So I've
Yeah.
had that, where I'll tell them before, I mean, like, you don't want to know why this is, but I'll tell you if you really want to know. I do know that answer, because some
Exactly.
people really can nerd out with me a little bit and say, yeah, I kind of want to know what is that? Where does that come from? And if I had half of an answer, I would tell them the truth, and I'm not exactly sure why, or I do know why, and it's this, but you're gonna want to punch me after I tell you,
Yeah.
just because.
Exactly. So, at the beginning, I mentioned how we probably all had that kind of experience of hating learning grammar in school.
Mhm.
Have you ever had any positive learning experiences with grammar?
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure I have. Where like teachers gave me candy if I conjugated some verb right, but I think that I like making realizations and comparisons with my language and another language. I like I like the fact that, and this is again because I'm a big language guy, I like the fact that learning learning to teach others uh, how to use English grammar has helped me understand not only my own grammar in English, but that of all the languages that I've learned and that I will learn, because you really just start thinking more about similarities across different languages and how things you can kind of relate to, like a subjunctive in English, or that's
Yeah.
thinking of the idea of, if you're a Latin language learner, the idea of a subjunctive mood and understanding what that means, and to be able to apply it to other languages and say, okay, well, they might not call it subjunctive in that language. Like I'm learning Hebrew right now, and they don't have a subjunctive. They just happen to use the future tense. But like you have to know what is a subjunctive, when is it subjunctive, to be able to know to use future. Whatever the
Mhm.
case, the positive things about grammar for me are that it's really just a greater understanding of my own language.
Yeah.
You know.
Absolutely. There have been countless times when a student asks a grammatical question and I have to quickly Google it or reference a book just to make sure I totally know it. Because sometimes they ask things that you never would expect. And in
Yeah.
teaching it, you really do have a greater appreciation for your own language. And I know, and also learning different languages that rely so heavily on grammatical forms that don't exist in your native language really opens your mind too. Like you were
Yeah.
talking about the subjunctive. And then learning Portuguese specifically, learning about the future subjunctive rather than just the
Mhm.
present and past, which is what Spanish has.
Right.
Kind of the whole concept of that was really fascinating to me as well. And there are some dead languages that have tenses or grammatical forms that no longer exist in any living language. So it's kind of
Really.
interesting to think about, how people thought about the world in ways that people no longer think about the world, which is
And
fascinating.
I think the most fascinating thing, on that same note, is like where people invent languages nowadays. There are people who have invented hundreds of languages for movies, for shows, for fun.
Yeah.
there's a grammar, there's a structure to grammar. Like that there are only certain things you would need to learn. How to pluralize a word, for example. What constitutes a noun or a thing? Do those concepts even exist in the same way? A verb and different people. I think understanding those bits and pieces of grammar are also easy to transfer from language to language, so that if you're learning 3-4 languages, that you can say, okay, well, what do I need to know here? I need to know how to pluralize this noun. How do they do that in this language?
Yeah.
How do they say this in the past tense? Do they add prefixes? Is it suffixes? In some language, they have what they call circumfixes, where it's at the beginning and the end, or
Yeah.
infixes. All these things are
Which
like,
is
where do I add how do I modify the word? And you have so much variety of these things, and that's why it's fascinating even to learn introductory lots of languages. To get like a gist, or to get to the high beginner level, let's say, of a few different languages, and see how they're different and really see what kind of things make them unique.
Absolutely.
And sometimes that teaches you a lot about people and their culture and even their, traditions or practices.
It really does. Yeah. So now let's think on a more personal level. So have you ever struggled with speaking? So for example, I know you speak Argentine Spanish. So you use el voceo.
El voceo, no, che, boludo, no, pasame la toalla, boludo, no, tenemos que hablar.
But it's not just Argentina that uses el voceo. They use it in Paraguay and Uruguay as well. And they use it some in Honduras and Nicaragua as well. Which
Costa Rica as well, yeah.
Costa Rica as well, yeah. Which, it kind of seems weird that there's a big chunk in the southern portion of the Spanish-speaking world and then a gap, and then suddenly they use it again in Central America. But
yeah,
sometimes things like that turn out that way. Who knows? But have you ever, in speaking with someone who speaks a completely different Spanish, have you ever had them correct you when in fact you actually are speaking correct Spanish, just with different grammatical rules from a different country?
Well, let's first of all argue whether or not that's correct to begin with. Is Argentine Spanish as its dialect in any way correct, or is it just a dialect like we would consider?
Specifically, el voceo can be considered correct. Specifically, Argentine Spanish.
Just that one concept
you're talking about. Depends on what aspects of Argentine Spanish you're talking about. El voceo is spoken widely enough that it is considered legitimate, correct, grammatical, everything.
I've never had anybody say that's incorrect. It's usually, oh, you're from Argentina. All right, get out of here. Or, depending on their relationship with Argentinians. But it seems to me that it's because, as you're saying, it's widely accepted. People have heard it before. It's not the first time they're ever hearing me say, vos decís, vos hablas. And so it's weirder to hear, like, the pronunciation than the grammar. I know the pronunciation, because it's a different, sometimes it's a different word completely, the pronunciation's obviously going to change. But when you, like, stress the wrong syllable or a different syllable, that's where people tend to be like, what are you saying? But that's, again, dialect, where dialects make it a little bit confusing sometimes to understand. Mm-hmm. Even in English, hearing other people. But I don't know. What about you? Do you understand? The rules of Argentine Spanish, voceo, and other differences? I guess that's one of the main ones.
In terms of grammar, I think that's one of the only main ones. But in terms of pronunciation, vocabulary,
that's a different
slang, it's a completely different story. Yeah. I'm familiar with it because of just exposure to Argentina, and I spent a few weeks in Argentina, but only a few weeks, so not enough to start speaking like an Argentine, but unless I had chosen to. But I did notice at that point I spoke pretty much like a Paraguayan, but I did notice that after spending enough time in Argentina, my mental dialogue in Spanish started to sound bit by bit more and more Argentine. I had to, shake my head and say, "What are you doing? Like, who is that in my head? There's someone in there that's different from how my voice normally sounds."
Yeah.
I don't know. And in terms of speaking Spanish in different places, I lived in Latin America for a good amount of time, over a year, and then multiple shorter trips. That was all before I lived in Spain, and when I first got to Spain, people were correcting me left and right, and assuming that I just didn't know. It's like,
right.
Oh, okay. I guess you're right. I guess I'm wrong, but I knew that I wasn't. People weren't familiar with different. Some of it was grammatical forms, and some of it was just vocabulary, pronunciation. People would say, no, you say it this way. And I would say, oh, thank you for helping me with pronunciation, which to a certain extent, I wanted to learn a new pronunciation, so it was okay. But at first it seemed like, well, I'm not wrong. I'm just saying it in a way you're not used to,
Yeah, it's also a factor of, like, whether someone's commonly hearing it because of tourism, a lot. If they hear that, or if they're just from a small village and they really don't understand you. because in the end, you're trying to communicate. Like when I speak Spanish in Spain, I still speak with an Argentine accent. It just comes out naturally to me, and I don't really care. I kind of have it's a part of my identity in learning Spanish, and I otherwise get caught up with, trying to say the Spain words or like gracias or something, and it's hard. I'll mix it. I'll just say gracias with the theta because I'm like hearing it all the time. But anyway, so if it were the case where someone in Spain just had no idea what the heck I was talking about, I would try to just neutralize the Spanish and just make it sound closer to his, because again, communication is what we're trying to attain here. We're trying to get to that point where we can understand each other. So you can have your identity all you want, but it's really about getting the message across.
Yeah, I had the same experience in Argentina, actually. I was saying that I needed to go. I was talking to a taxi driver, and I was telling him that I needed to go to the Cinco de Mayo. And he was like, Mayo?
Plaza de Mayo?
Sí, Cinco de Mayo? ¿Qué es eso?
Mayo.
I was like, Mayo. And then I was like, Mayo, boludo, ¿por qué dijiste Mayo? Es Mayo.
That's pretty good.
So,
sí,
yeah.
Plaza de Mayo, 25 de Mayo.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, let's, we're sidetracking again. So let's return to grammar. Are there any specific tips that you recommend for people if they are going to continue learning languages? Should they learn grammar? Should they not learn grammar? Is there any useful advice you could give our audience, Ruben?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, honestly, the whether to learn grammar or not is, in my opinion, it's really not a question. I think you should learn grammar. Whether or not you do it all at the beginning or not, it's probably up for debate. I don't think you should start with only grammar, clearly. But I think that a nice balance of all those things is really, really helpful. But the most valuable advice that I could give as far as how to learn a language faster, utilizing this idea of grammar, is to figure out, importantly where you're using the language. If it is for fun, it's different than it's going to be for work or for school. If you're writing essays, you're going to learn different language, and the grammar necessity might be higher than if you're just kind of wanting to travel, wanting to make friends and build relationships with the language. I think that it's really more important to me to sound like a native speaker, and for that reason, you're learning all the grammar is not going to be as exciting as it is to fit in, and to sound, and to be mistaken for someone from that country. It's always the highlight of every language learner's day when someone thinks that they're from a country that they're not from because of their language ability. And it's not because they have impeccable grammar. It's usually because they sound quite good. So I'll tell you to practice pronunciation more than grammar at the very beginning, because the grammar stuff you're going to learn. It's just the rules that you'll see so often. And if you make a realization later on, it's kind of easier to change than speaking and abilities are, and sounds that you kind of acquire at the beginning. So learn the grammar eventually. Have that a goal. Don't skip out on anything, because even just knowing it, whether you're applying it or not, gives you a lot of power, lots of awareness, and I think a lot of confidence. But in the end, being able to speak clearly, or at least identify the goal, whatever it is, for me in most cases it's speaking. So I want to just know the grammar appropriately. If I'm really confused, if I really don't understand why something is that way, I'll look up the grammar behind it. I'll see what it literally means. But not until it's really necessary, or maybe I'm worried about understanding it really well. So get to speaking. Get there faster.
Yeah, that's great advice. I think it's important to pronounce things well to make good first impressions. But I think having an understanding of grammar will help you maintain good first impressions. So pronunciation helps you create it. Grammar, as the glue of a language, will help you hold together that good first impression and help people continue to think, oh, well, this is a really interesting person who can communicate interesting ideas effectively. You know, when you, for example, even in, let's say, a social media post. Ruben, have you ever read a social media post, seen incorrect grammar, and noticed it and immediately kind of dismissed the person's opinion, at least just a little bit, simply because they didn't express it well? Yes, we're all guilty of that. And I wish that I weren't so judgmental, but frankly, I am. I'm sorry. So I don't want to, and I still read the post, I still consider what they have to say, but the fact that I notice this, the fact that I think about this, and I think most people kind of respond to these things in the same way, the fact that I notice this means I'm not only thinking about what you have to say, I'm also thinking about how you said it. So in order for you to just have your ideas out there and for that to have a greater power, I would say it's more effective if it's grammatically sound. So,
no question. Yeah, it's really it's almost like a little bit of an accent. When you make a mistake, it's like a wrong accent. If you would consider anything a wrong accent, that would be it. You spelled that, or even in like books. I mean, sometimes we see typos or mistakes, or even misuse of language in a textbook or in a regular text, fiction or not. And so you almost want to like just email the editor or the publisher or the author, like it's gonna matter, but or like they haven't received a dozen or so messages like per week. But it comes from a good place. I think that in most cases you probably want to help them and want to explain the difference to them, make sure they knew it instead of shaming them. Right? That's not the best. That's not your style.
I'm not about shaming. It's all about helping them. But yeah, it matters. But for those learning a language, until you reach a higher level, I don't think you should spend time on it necessarily. Start with other areas of interest until you have enough of a base that you can start building this structure or learning about how the language is built, and then use your knowledge of grammar to your advantage. Don't spend too much time learning it, because for most people that will be incredibly boring. But learn what you have to. So I would say seek knowledge of grammar in a positive way, not a negative way. When you're curious, look. When you want to know why something is a certain way, figure out the grammar rules. But don't do it because you think you have to. Yeah. Do it because you want to, and then you will learn faster, more efficiently, and more effectively. And you won't hate grammar.
Advocates for grammar. Or like, so one last question maybe, do you correct people's grammar in English? Your friends and
depends on the context and the situation.
Family members? In what context would you actually say out loud?
If, for example, if I'm speaking to a child who might not actually know, I absolutely will correct the child. In terms of like let's say my parents or my siblings, if I were to correct their grammar, it would be because if it were in something that's written. Right. It would be because it's in a formal situation, and I think, you should really do this correctly because it's a formal situation. Or it would just be to annoy them, to be provocative, probably.
Just
what about you?
I only do it with people I know and love really well. I mean, and I would say I want to make sure that it's not I've drinking, things like that. Like, I just want to know you. I want to make sure you can say it. You can say it. I won't be mad. I won't even judge you. Really, I just want to know that that it's not I'm drinking. So like those kind of things come up every once in a while. But I would never do it to a stranger unless they're paying me or they have the idea is that we're language buddies and we're correcting everything we say. That's different. Native speakers, never.
Yeah.
Just say, editing. If it's requested, absolutely. Which is always Another lesson too, to have people always asking questions, always asking, "Is this right?" Double checking, because that's really the only way that you're going to get honest feedback, is to be in that relationship where you're getting grammar corrections, where you're getting these pieces of feedback, and because otherwise, no one's going to stop you. It's really awkward for native speakers to native speakers, for even for us to foreigners. It's not as easy to just bring up all the time, especially every single one.
I'd say just it depends on the situation.
Drinking. You ever hear that? I'm drinking.
Yeah. Drinking, drinked.
I've drank. I've drank.
Yeah. Drank.
Anyway. Dranked.
There are all kinds of
drinking
false past participles and false simple past forms of the verb to drink.
Indeed. Let's see. Can we think of like a really crazy grammatical term? Past participle.
The past.
There's always the
past perfect progressive.
Past perfect progressive. Past perfect progressive.
He had been going.
Yeah. Future
for
perfect.
Example.
He had been going.
Perfect progressive.
Yes.
It's a lot of P's.
This is present perfect progressive. We should start like a language exchange called present perfect progressive.
It's makes it sound, if you take them all out of context, so we are present.
Yeah.
We strive to learn perfectly, and we are progressive with our ideas. If you say it that way, it's actually present.
This is our
perfect.
Our slogan.
Progressive.
Present.
I like it.
Perfect. Progressive.
Awesome. All right.
It's way better than continuous.
I think rather than continuous and continuing with this collab, I think it's about time we wrap things up. But this was a great discussion about grammar. Maybe the jury's still out, but
Thank you.
But I personally think that grammar is not quite evil. That's too strong a term. So it's great discussing this with all of you. Thank you for watching, and I hope this is good.
Thank you, Sam.
All right, take care, Ruben. Bye.
Bye-bye.